Hi, this is Officer Uzik from the Aventura Police Department in Dade County, Florida. Trying to get a hold of retired ATF agent Fred Gleffy.
Officer, I'm just finishing up some work. Is there anything I can help you real quickly?
Yeah, I just wanted to check on a story. We got a guy that frequents our city. I've known him for the last 15 years, and he told me this pretty crazy story, and he said that he worked an undercover operation with you.
What's his name?
Flaherty?
Richard J. Flattery? How's old Captain Flattery doing these days?
Hey, he's homeless.
Homeless. Well, that's a shame. He was one hell of an undercover guy.
So it was true?
Yeah, that's true, absolutely. After the trial, I was even interviewed by 2020 and CBS. I might even have those tapes. But let me give you a call tomorrow and I'll go over the case with you.
That would be great. I really appreciate it. Hey, one last thing. Richard kind of figured out that I would check up on a story, and he asked me not to contact you or anyone involved in the case.
Why's that?
He said it would be bad for my career and dangerous for his health.
I doubt it, man. It's been over 30 years. Although the operation did piss a lot of people off. Let's talk tomorrow and I'll fill you in all the details.
Hey, I really appreciate the help. Thank you, man.
Police investigating a deadly hit and run that happened over the weekend. The victim, a decorated veteran.
Decorated Vietnam veteran killed after a hit and run.
A 70-year-old decorated Vietnam veteran.
Personal items and debris scattered across the street where a Vietnam veteran was hit by a car. The driver never stopped to help.
My name's David Uzik. I've been a police officer for the last 17 years in Miami. I've also worked as a detective and undercover officer. I met Richard Flaherty about 15 years ago, and he was living on the streets. I offered to get him some help, but he said no, he was okay. After that, I would just say hello when I saw him, and eventually we started talking about news, jokes, politics. But I never asked him about his background, and I think he respected me for that. I heard all the rumors about him. Some people said he was a tunnel rat in Vietnam. Other people said he was a circus clown or some eccentric millionaire that just chooses to live on the streets. But nobody really knew who Richard was. We started talking more and more. We would sometimes meet up for lunch. And about the end of April in 2015, Richard, for whatever reason, after all these years, he finally decided to tell me his whole life story. He told me he was the smallest man to ever serve in the military, and he became a captain in the Green Berets, serving 2 tours in Vietnam and Thailand. He told me he worked undercover with federal agents to bust a crime ring that was stealing tons of weapons and explosives. He mentioned about being engaged to the woman he loved. And I couldn't help thinking as he told me this incredible story, how could a man who overcame so much adversity and beat the odds by becoming a war hero, how could he have ended up on the streets? It's May 9th, Saturday, 2015. I found out this morning at 7 a.m. that my good friend Richard Flaherty was killed. At that point, we had a traffic homicide with no leads on the suspect. Since I was the only one that knew Richard kept all his belongings in the storage unit, I figured we head over there and start the investigation. Maybe we can find some clues or leads. I was so amazed when we opened that storage unit and I saw all the documentation and items and pictures that Richard kept on his life, from military and medical records to letters, poems, bank statements. It seemed like he was almost leaving me all the breadcrumbs to not only investigate his death, but also start to learn about his life. And just like any other investigation I've done, I knew I had to start at the beginning.
On our way to Port Charlotte.
The first person that I knew I had to speak to was Richard's older brother, Walter. I was really unsure of how it was going to go because Richard told me he and Walter had a falling out and hadn't spoken in over 10 years.
You guys were born in Stamford?
Yeah, we were born in Stamford, Connecticut. I was born in 42. Richard was born in 1945. Two of us got along very well, Richard and myself, during our childhood. He was always smaller. He was born small, and he always was the smallest person in the class.
Of course, people stared at him, you know, when he walked into a room or a restaurant or whatever. It must have been a handicap, some sort of handicap. Yeah. And I think that's why he had to prove to everyone that he was he was somebody, and he was strong, and he's strong in body, strong in mind. And I think that's why he got the military in his head.
He was little, he was always tiny, but he was hard as a rock. And in those days, you didn't lift weights, nobody did that stuff. Rick, my boss. That's him right there. So see, he is small.
I knew Richard from high school. We went to the same Catholic high school, and he was really popular in high school. He was really smart, and he was on the football team, and he was invited to all the parties.
There he is. This is 64.
Richard Flaherty, the giant killer.
He always said he wanted to be a military. He always wanted to be a military. And he knew at the time that his height might prevent him from getting in. And matter of fact, the first time he applied, they turned him down. So Walter, at this point, was a lawyer. So he asked Walter to write the congressman and have the politicians put a word into the Army about this little guy who's, he wants to do this. And they finally approved it. It took a couple of years. And then when he went, he was underweight. And he said, they told him, you have to gain some weight. You have to beef up a little bit, which he did. And he started lifting weights and everything. And they were going to let him in with his height. He was just too skinny at the time. Yeah. So he did. He did that, and he beefed up and worked really hard. And he told him, he says, I can do it. I can do it. Why just give me a chance? I can do it.
And he was the littlest person in the United States military. He got a special congressional waiver, I guess it was, to go into the military.
He never made a complaint about boot camp or about it being unfair, that they should make some sort of accommodation because of the height disadvantage.
He would jump out of the plane first. They'd watch to see where he went. and then they circle around and jump the rest of the company after them.
You're going to exit an aircraft in a Special Forces training operation. You're going to be carrying generators, you're going to be carrying weapons, you got your parachute system. So you'd be jumping anywhere from 80 to 100 pounds easily. You know, so that's a lot of stuff to carry. When you're only 4'9", it's that much harder to carry that. In fact, his rucksack, which you strapped on below your reserve parachute, it had to be close to hanging on the ground. So for him to get out of the aircraft with his rucksack down here on his shins, that's pretty tough to move. You know, the rest of us, it was maybe at our knees, but he would have had it down close to his feet. So it's physically harder for him to do that. I would have never even questioned his ability to do it, because just from the standpoint of who he was, I mean, he's just tough, so he could do it.
He did it, you know, and that's hard training. It's hard stuff to get through. There's a lot of guys to this day that put in for SF training and never make it. A lot of guys put in for, 101st Airborne stuff, and they never make it. But you saw those pictures that you had of him with all his military stuff on, running with a rifle. And the caption was, I think, smallest man in the military.
Captain Rick Lencioni invited me up to the 101st Airborne's reunion to see if I could find more men that knew Richard. I thought that they might be reluctant to talk to me because I was a stranger in their world. But it was the opposite. They gladly shared their experiences and stories with me, hoping the next generation understands the sacrifices they and their friends gave for their country.
That's when we arrived.
When you first got to Vietnam?
Right. Well, we didn't know what we were going to really get into when we left Fort Campbell. We found out in a hurry, especially in January, February 1968, when the Tet Offense kicked off. We found out right quick what it was like to be in Vietnam. Well, the first time I saw him, it was sort of funny because he was a real little guy, and we thought it was a joke to start with, but turned out that he was our platoon leader.
I never seen anybody smaller than him on there, other than the Vietnamese.
But everybody knew Richard. He stood out.
For a little guy, he had a big voice. And, his voice carried. Maybe it was something he had practiced, but it worked.
Was it a little strange to see a guy that small?
It was very strange. When I first looked at him, I did a double take.
But I remember seeing recon platoon going across the rice paddy over there. They were just kind of all spread out, moving across there, and he was right in the front, leading, had his map out, he was looking at the map, and he had this big stogie. Stogie was bigger than him, but I remember he was leading and they were following, and to me, I said, he's a good leader.
There was a doubt that he was in charge. I saw the respect that was there too, because they knew that he could be stringent at times.
He always had that attitude. He had that tough guy attitude. Even though he was really short, he was always really tough looking and always very outspoken and a forceful individual. But he was very smug too. He was very smug about it. He just had that attitude. He was a tough little prick, but they like tough little pricks when you're in combat. They don't want that, milk toasty guy.
He was full of fire, They're always willing to go, willing to do whatever needs to be done.
We would get these telegrams, your son has been wounded. And then a week or less later, we get another telegram, he's back in action again. So his wounds didn't stop him from carrying out his mission.
That motherfucker's tough. Yeah. A lot of respect for that guy. He is a tough son of a bitch.
One thing I didn't notice about Richard right away, he kind of leaned toward the ruthless side a little bit. He was pretty tough on the enemy. At that point, there were no prisoners being taken, and I don't know if that was Richard's doing or not, but he certainly didn't show any emotion towards what had happened. It was when Flaherty and I did the operation, sweeping the village, going down, we were actually on opposite sides of a river. And I think it was in what we called the 8-Clickville at that time. It was this long 8,000-meter village that ran with a river running through it. And it was a known area where you're going to get contact. You never went in the 8-Clickville without running into the enemy. For some reason, they just kept coming back there. And so we're doing a sweep, and My unit had jumped some North Vietnamese and Viet Cong on one side of the river. And we shot several of them, but they weren't dead. And I was going to call for a medevac helicopter, a dust-off, to get them out of there. So, because I had the medics work on them, and it looked like, okay, well, they're about as stable as they're going to get. And so I'm radioing over to Richard, and I said, I've got 2 Victor Charlie WIA. And he said, Roger, 2 Victor Charlie KIA. And I said, no, WIA. I said, so, Whiskey India Alpha. And he says, no, he kept coming back with the KIA. And I knew what he was saying, because he was saying basically, let's just move on, kill them, let's just go. And I had guys in my platoon that are looking at me going, no, we don't want to do this. And so I said, no, we're going to evacuate them. And I made Richard stand down and wait till we got a chopper in there. A lot of things that happened like that over there, as soon as it was over, you forgot about it. Later on in the tour, I became Richard's company commander. So now he's still platoon leader, he's reporting to me. He came in one time to come see me, and Richard would wear this revolver on his hip, and it had white handles on it, almost like a pearl handle type revolver. I have no idea what it was really made of, but that's what it looked like. It was like a 6-gun. And he took it out of the holster and pointed it at me. And he's smiling, and he spun it back and put it back in the holster. And then he does it again. Now, we haven't really said a word to each other. And he puts it back in the holster. He's smiling all this time. And I had my rifle down like this, and I went click, click, which goes from basically safe to full automatic. And he heard that. I said, Richard, if that clears that holster again, I'm going to stitch you from your toes to the top of your head. And he just looked at me and smiled, and he turned around and walked away. He never said a word during that whole encounter. I was the only one that talked.
Why do you think you did that?
He got a reaction from me. He wanted to see what I'd do, see if he could scare me.
He looked for a fight. So I asked him one day, hey, you got any trouble lately? He said, no, but I'm looking for some,
In late summer of '68, I was listening in on the battalion net, and a recon platoon, which Richard was commanding at the time, had come into contact with a large NBA force, which was, I don't know if we ever really determined how big the force was, but it was a lot larger than his recon platoon. They had set up a defensive perimeter, and they were being attacked all night long. The NBA, their purpose was to overrun them, to basically kill every one of them. And nobody ever had it in their mind that they were going to surrender. So, and I can guarantee you in Richard's platoon, that was not a thought that anybody would have. They're not going to surrender. And the fight began, and they fought all night long. They fought with everything they had. A lot of them became casualties. In fact, I think probably a majority of the platoon with some type of casualty, either killed or wounded. But in the morning, they came out of it. And with the ones that were left, that were still able to fight, had fought all through the night. They killed, I don't want to say 100, but probably close to that of North Vietnamese were killed in that engagement. There was a big pile of MVA dead around them, but they were still there. And Richard commanded that whole thing. Nobody could get to him. The last thing you ever want to do is run out of ammunition. And I'm sure that night he was probably getting close to it. And I'd heard nothing on the net that night that indicated he was getting any form of relief. And they couldn't have done an airdrop into a tight perimeter like that. You'd probably be giving it to the North Vietnamese. You can't be that pinpoint accurate on an airdrop. Richard had several casualties. It was just constant. I mean, all of us did. I don't know if he lost more than others or not. He was a very aggressive officer, so there's a chance that he would have lost more people because he was very aggressive and moving to contact to engage the enemy. But I can tell you that his men didn't rebel against him for that because they trusted him.
As far as being a good platoon leader, I think he done an outstanding job.
The first time I met Richard Flaherty was when I checked into the team house in Hua Hin to relieve him of his command. I was taking over that detachment. And we shook hands. We were the same rank, so we didn't exchange salutes, but we shook hands, and he briefed me on the team. We trained the Thai Border Patrol Police in operations similar to what U.S. Army Special Forces do. And their assigned duties were to patrol the borders of Cambodia, Laos, and Burma. I asked him some questions about where he'd been, and he related he was formerly with the 101st Airborne Division of Vietnam, and he got wounded. Later on, I found out he also got the Silver Star. He had a demeanor about him which commanded respect at some times, and then he had a great sense of humor. Being short, he had a little Napoleonic attitude, but that carried him in his career in the military.
After leaving the military, Richard told me he's going to try his hand in the garment industry and open up a clothing factory.
He wanted to start his own business, and I apparently didn't go very well because he had ordered spools. You know how spools of material come in? Well, not a spool. They ended up in my father's cellar. And so I don't think he got very far.
But he was kind of a character. At one time he had a clothing factory. It didn't go well, and I bought him out. I bought him maybe 10,000 garments that he had left, whatever. The children's wear. Right. I bought it all out for $1 a piece or whatever, something like that.
Although the garment industry didn't work out, he did say it was worth it because at the factory he met his girlfriend, Jill Cohn. They eventually moved to Miami where she was offered a teaching job, and then they got engaged.
He was easygoing, very mellow. He spoke very mellow. Told me how he had a 6-foot brother. And I said, what happened to you? He said, I'm part Italian and part Irish. I said, oh, you got the Italian in you then. And he would mention little things like that. He'd mention about the girlfriend he had. She was Jewish, and for that reason, the family didn't like him. And she was killed in a car accident on 163rd Street.
The police report stated she was killed in a one-car accident, that she was driving at a high rate of speed and she just lost control of her vehicle.
And he said that it's the only woman that he ever really trusted and really felt like that he had a connection with.
After the death of Jill Cohn, Richard's life took a dark turn and his alcohol intake spiraled out of control.
About 1976, 1977, he came in and he found me. I don't know how. I was living in a different house in Hollywood. He came in about 11 o'clock at night and he had a rifle he wanted to sell me, an AR-15 rifle. I knew nothing about it. Now I would have bought it because now everybody's into guns. He just came over to my house. He needed some money. He wanted about $150, and I said no. What do I don't know if he used it on somebody or what do I know?
1976, I was in Tampa. He was in Miami. He gave me a call, and he said, "Can I come and visit you for a few days?" And I was a little wary of that, but okay, sure. Supper will be ready for you. So 6 o'clock rolls around. He's not there. 7, 8 o'clock, he's not there. I just went to bed. Then, 2 o'clock in the morning, boom, 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 at the front door. I opened it up and Richard's there. And he's completely drunk, yelling and screaming. He came into the house, pulled out a gun, loaded gun, told me about somebody he wanted to kill and how horrible humanity is. And that sort of thing kept up at my house for 3 days. On and off, very drunk, yelling obscenities, waving guns around.
He wanted me to come see him, and I never went down to see him. Because he'd say, well, you come down to Miami and we'll hang out, we'll do this, And I never really went down there because I still had kind of a, I don't know about Flaherty stuff, Because I always thought he was a little on the edge. And I thought, well, I don't know if I want to go hang out with Flaherty again, because we weren't always on the friendliest of terms.
He had a kitchen counter. It was a kitchen, but a counter. He didn't have a kitchen table, and had the chairs under the counter, right? So, and the counter happened to be facing the front door. So he had to go to work at 11 o'clock at night. And I can't remember how he hooked it up, the Uzi, to stand up. It was standing on the counter. And he said, if somebody opens that door, you shoot him, you pull the trigger. I said, I can't do that. He said, if somebody tries to get in this house, pull that trigger. Oh, now, do you think I could go to sleep?
Richard's downward spiral continued until he was arrested for possession with intent to distribute a large amount of marijuana and cocaine. As a police officer, when you look at Richard's overall record, it's an anomaly, because usually with drug dealers, you'll see them getting arrested numerous times throughout their lives. For Richard, this was his one and only big pop in the drug distribution world. Richard was able to get the state attorney's office to drop most of the charges and ended up only serving a minimal time in jail. And then, strange as it seems, somehow two old friends meet again.
I started work for a car dealership in South Miami, in Perrine actually. And I'm sitting there at my desk one day, and we had an ad running in the local paper looking for sales help. And in through the door comes a short individual. I paid no attention. And as soon as he opened his mouth to the receptionist, he was barely able to reach the top of the counter. I yelled out, "Flaherty." And then he turned around, and I ran up to him, and we hugged. No, a hug. What a 6'1" individual would do with a 4'8", but we hugged. And we had a great little short reunion, and he got the job. And we used to go clubbing together. And in Miami, at that time, there were several places that were open 24 hours a day. So we hung out together, and we did with young mid-20-year-old guys who were veterans, and had fun. Being of short stature, Richard didn't take a lot to get him inebriated.
Ever have to carry him?
Actually, yes.
Just scooping him up and carrying him to the car?
Yeah. Or carrying him like a cradle him. He wasn't that heavy.
Do you remember that night? Like, what was the circumstance?
No, I don't remember that night. There's too many of those nights.
I had an apartment for a little while after I get out of the Navy. He'd come over. You know, we had a big dresser like that. He'd pull out the bottom drawer, throw his blanket in, and go to sleep. He was a character. He did silly stuff like that, I guess.
The 1980s starts another interesting chapter in Richard's life. First thing, he re-ups with the Army and becomes a reservist captain in the Green Berets, serving out of Fort Bragg. He also starts working undercover in a federal operation that, to this day, is still partially classified.
He was arrested, and there was threat of him going to jail for gun running, selling guns.
He was working with the Cubans, the anti-Castro people, and they had an armory or something in the swamp or woods or something, and he took the fall for it.
Richard was also part of a right-wing anti-Castro group that was training soldiers in the Everglades. Most experts speculate that the entire training unit was a covert CIA-backed operation put in place to stop the spread of communism. Richard was suspected of not only training the rebels, but also providing them with weapons.
This is Al Dempsey in Miami, just 5 minutes away from Miami Beach's lush multi-million-dollar hotels. Men are training to fight Fidel Castro's armies.
I remembered that Richard did tell me he worked for Bushmaster Rifles throughout his life. I called the company and spoke to a gentleman named Mac Gwynn Jr. He told me that his dad, Mac Sr., started the company, and it was eventually changed to the name Bushmaster, and confirmed that Richard did work for his dad.
It seems the tools of terrorists and fanatics aren't hard to come by because they're stolen from our military bases.
Sergeant Byron Carlisle and Sergeant Keith Anderson, both Fort Bragg Green Berets, triggered the Inspector General's report. Both men were charged with selling large quantities of stolen munitions to undercover agents. You are about to watch one of their transactions as captured by a hidden government camera. The videotape was made in a Key West motel, where Sergeant Anderson on the right is selling grenades to an undercover agent. Before they were arrested, Anderson and Carlisle had arranged to collect some $65,000 for this inventory that included more than 60,000 rounds of small arms ammunition, 24 landmines, 30 grenades, 20 pounds of TNT, and 36 half-pound blocks of C4.
A lot of weapons were being walked out the door by trusted individuals. They weren't being taken by some guy in a ski mask at night. And in those days, the munitions were the equivalent of cash. There's no difference. Whatever you took, from a bullet to a hand grenade to a claymore mine to a whatever, it had cash value.
Well, I had heard about Richard many times from several of the agents that he was a former military guy, that he had been arrested on a silencer case, and I also knew he had a narcotics background. And so as a result of that, I approached the control agent and asked him, look, would you mind if I took control of Richard and started using him? And so I made arrangements to meet with Richard. My first impressions of Richard when he walked in, he was 4'10". So I didn't really believe that he said he was who he said he was. He didn't trust me and I didn't trust him, which is obvious for any type of thing. But then I started getting into my background and telling him a little bit what was going on. He knew that I knew what I was talking about Fort Bragg. He knew all the pieces up there. He knew all the players, and I did too. And really from that point on, Richard was always very faithful to me. I either called him on the phone, he'd call me right back, or he would call me saying, so-and-so call me, what do you want to do? And so from that point on, we really kind of hit it off pretty well. And I did trust him because you understand as an undercover officer, when you walk into an undercover meeting the first time with a bad guy, you are very, very, very nervous that a lot of things can go wrong. Is it a ripoff? ATF agents have been killed in Miami, DEA has been killed, FBI has been killed on that first initial meeting when they're meeting bad guys they don't know. And so that's what you got to worry about. I'm going off of Richard's rapport with these guys that they're going to accept me when I come in. What was my role? I was a drug dealer out of Miami, Florida. What my cover was, I was up in Charlotte trying to collect money from a guy that owes, $102,000 in payment for a drug shipment that never made it up here. Richard met me at the office in Miami, and we contacted Keith Anderson, who was one of the first defendants that we met. When Richard talked to Anderson on the phone, he said he had a contact down in Miami that was in the business. And he said, but this guy can probably provide you with everything that you need and has the money to do it also. And said, we want to come up and see you, and maybe we can talk further about it. But my contact in Miami, meaning me, is into ordnance, is into weapons, is into anything that they can provide to the cartel down in South America. And so at which time Anderson bought it, and he said, come on up and let's talk about it. Richard and I flew up to a small hotel up there near Fort Bragg, and Richard got on the phone and he called and talked to Keith Anderson on the phone, again, to the best of my knowledge. And so Richard hung up the phone, he said he's on his way. So approximately maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes later, there was a knock at the door, opened up, and this big, burly, stocky guy comes walking in. And immediately, he starts saying, he said, well, good to see you again, sir. Good to see you, talking to Richard. So he said, Captain Flaherty, how you doing? And so from that point on, I just felt that there wasn't going to be any problems. I kind of asked him, well, what are you looking to do? And he says, well, I've got friends, I've got partners that want to go farther with this type of stuff. I can provide you with ordnance if you can provide us with narcotics. And they wanted to control all the cocaine that came in and out of Fort Bragg. And so I said, well, what type of ordnance? And we went into a long array of different ordinances he has. He says, but I forget exactly how much it was right that time, maybe 50 pounds of C4. He had det cord, he had timers, he had fuses, all that type of stuff. And he said, I can sell it to you tonight. And so I said, well, all right. So I thought he had to go somewhere to get it. Well, it was in the back of his truck. And he brought it in a big parachute kit bag. And so we opened it up, and sure enough, everything was in it. As a matter of fact, he even had more than that. We had 2 bags full of stuff. Flaherty was all over it. I mean, he was like a kid in a candy store. And I remember picking up a block of C4 and smelling it. And he says, oh, what a great smell. I forget how much I paid for it. I want to say maybe $1,000, maybe $2,000. And he was ecstatic. Anderson was ecstatic. He said, I finally found someone that I think we're going to be able to get started with. And he said he wants to make arrangements for us to come back up and meet his partners. And so he said partners to begin with. And so I said, okay, no problem. Anderson started telling me about that him and another guy were involved in a classified operation camp that was down in South America. And that he said, we got a very good scheme of how we can get you anything you want. They were telling me that they could supply me anywhere from 2.5 to 5 tons of ordnance a month. It was what the numbers that were talked about in the hotel rooms. And matter of fact, the last one, I believe, the 105 rounds and stuff like that, that came to about maybe 2 tons of ordnance that we got, that we actually took them off. We met Anderson. He came down in I want to say a U-Haul truck Carlisle stayed. Carlisle was always a smarter one. Not saying that Anderson wasn't smart, but Carlisle always kind of figured out what the main deal was. And so he stayed up in Fayetteville at his home whenever Anderson came down. And so Anderson came down, he took all the side roads. He met us a couple miles away, but it was in a little orange grove. And he drove down, and as he's following me, I basically just accelerated with my car. And then everybody closed in on him and took him off and arrested him. He got out and he turned around to go back toward the van. And I believe he had a gun in the front seat. But anyhow, he never got to it.
I mean, that's clearly, it's the fish rots from the head down. And it was an earthquake when we showed up and started demanding the accounting for these items.
In their trial, the sergeant said they believed the munitions they stole were for Contra rebels in Nicaragua and Honduras. They thought they were dealing with a CIA-connected arms merchant.
I spoke with Byron Carlisle by phone several times, and he was very adamant about the fact that he was innocent, and this was a covert CIA operation being conducted by Captain Richard J. Flaherty in order to funnel weapons down to the anti-Sandinista guerrillas.
They came up with this CIA defense after the whole thing was over with. It was never before.
Their whole defense was a complete, utter bogus story. These guys were guilty all the way from beginning to end. And in the case of Carlisle and Anderson, it was all about the money.
I got Agent of the Year from the U.S. Attorney's Office. We never would have got the case done had it been for Flaherty.
After the excitement of the undercover case, Richard takes a job at the post office.
He never liked the post office from day one. And so he was irritated big time.
By the 1990s, according to Richard's resume, he was working as a freelance writer, and ironically, he said he was working on a documentary titled Homelessness: Problems, Programs, and Solutions. The ghosts of Richard's past were starting to catch up to him. By the mid-90s, Richard quits his job at the post office and starts living on the streets.
So sometimes at night, you'd leave here, you'd see some stuff going on?
A couple times, yeah. I'd heard it once before, but leaving about 2:30 in the morning, walking toward my car out here, and under the tree, you just hear the like these vicious screams, and it sounded like a struggle going on. You know, walk a little closer. You don't want to get too close. You don't know what's going on over there, and you get closer and you see it's just Richard, sitting down against a tree with his hands on his head, just screaming. Like sounded like he was fighting for his life. That's something I'll never forget.
He talked about a few incidents in the war that were very unsettling. We were talking about the war and how people don't understand. This is after he came back, all the flack for the Vietnam veterans and everything. And he said, they don't understand. They don't understand what it's like being in the jungle. They don't understand. We had to eat bugs for dinner. They don't understand, and they criticize us, and they criticize us. And they said, and then he said to me, they don't understand how we could shoot our own man in the back. And I said, what do you mean by that? They were in a confrontation battle or whatever they called it at the time. One of his guys freaked out and somehow made a white flag and went running toward the Viet Cong, okay? So Richard told his men to shoot him. And I that's a decision he had to make. I think that it stayed with him always, and the other horrors of war.
If somebody in our unit did something that warranted him getting killed, it potentially could result in a lot of people looking the other way. So if the platoon leader is that strong, and Richard was that strong, and he decided, hey, this guy's a danger to all of us, and they agree, who knows what happens?
Yeah, he lost 3 guys. I guess on one mission or something, because they didn't do, he told them to go this way, and they did something else, and he wound up getting shot. But, I guess that really upset him. Richard, you're a senior officer, you give an order, you expect people to carry it out. It wasn't his fault, but, I guess he He carried that with him too.
Well, even when we were up at Fort Bragg, he never would sleep. He would call me at all crazy hours, and I was staying awake. And so then finally I told him, I said, would you go to bed? Would you go to bed? He says, I can't sleep, I can't sleep. I said, oh, are you nervous about this? He said, no, I'm not nervous about this. He says, I just can't sleep.
Richard was a figure on the midnight shift. You always saw him out there. He was always awake, never slept. If he did, he always had one eye open.
He was carrying a lot of scars emotionally from the war and from the fighting. And the fact that he was out on the streets, we had set him up in a condominium, but he just sold it.
Right.
And went back to the streets.
You think he just wasn't comfortable sitting in one spot, or it just...
I think he had the nightmares of the war, and it would get to him for being in one place.
I think it's a lot of things. It's a lot of different things. And I wish that I could have gotten inside, and we talked about it, and I talked about it. I said, I can't have you, now that we're older, I can't have you living like that. I just can't have you living like that. Well, that's where I feel at my best. That's what I want. And he was probably homeless for almost 30 years.
He told me how he got beat up by 3 men. They cracked his head open. They picked him up and slammed him.
He was beat up pretty bad. I saw him, and I came up on him. I'm like, man, what the hell happened to you? Man, I got beat up. A bunch of guys came out and beat me up. Why'd you call us, Richard? I'm not going to call you for these guys. These guys, it's the government. The government came and beat me up. The government came and beat you up. All right, well, call us next time the government comes beat you up. I'll beat up the government. I don't mind. I don't like them anyways.
That was a shock to me when I found that out. I found that out probably last year, that he was just living on the streets. Seeing him interact with other people and the way he talked to me, it seemed like he had a really good idea of who he was, and I wouldn't have expected him to become a homeless type of person. And so the only thing I could think of is that he chose to be.
The first time I met him, he was sitting under a tree, the black olive tree over here in the parking lot. He was sitting reading a book, and I approached him to see if he needed any water or anything. It was a hot day, middle of the summer. And he didn't have a whole lot to say. He just said, no, I'm fine, and went about his business. I approached him a few times, talked to him, and asked if he's a veteran, and he said he was, and didn't really get into it a whole lot, but, just asked if he needed anything, and a few times I had invited him in here to take a shower to get himself cleaned up, and he was happy to do that. He was sitting on the back porch one night. We had just had some patio furniture delivered a couple weeks prior, and normally he was out under a chair somewhere, and in the middle of the night, I had walked out to take a phone call, and he goes, oh, do you want me to leave? And I was like, no, man, you don't have to leave. And so he sat there, and I think he may have spent the night on the couch there.
I remember the first time I saw him, I was a little boy. My dad had taken me to the mall for a Christmas event. And I remember seeing Richard there, and he stood out for a number of reasons, but I had a tremendous amount of compassion for him, and I had a lot of respect for him as well, not knowing anything about him. And throughout my life, I just remember seeing him on the streets, and he just always seemed to be level-headed and kind.
We run calls daily on homeless people, and sometimes, when we run calls on these guys 3, 4, 5 times in a week, you kind of get a little bit complacent, and you just may take them for granted. And I want the guys to know that these people are somebody, that they possibly do have a story. How much more tough could their life be? They're living on the streets. What could you do to them that would be worse than what they've probably been through or are going through at that time? We do have a couple that tax us on a daily basis that become regulars, but Richard was not one of those guys. He didn't call, and he didn't call us up to come help. He helped himself.
I think to this day, though, the reason why Richard is always so bitter was because he was ripped out of the United States Army, which is a reduction in force after Vietnam. And, you know, the military was his life.
Everybody's expendable. Nobody is special. You can be replaced. Here's a guy that literally put his life on the line for the government in a way, and for himself. I mean, Richard was a risk taker. He got a thrill out of what he did, you know? So it's not like it was a one-way street, but when you stick your neck out as much as a guy like that does, being a tunnel rat in Vietnam, I mean, and then the government just cuts you loose, that's tough. That's tough.
He just always said that he really enjoyed being there. He said he never wanted to leave. He said, I would have stayed over there until they kicked me out. He always was talking about, you know, he missed wearing a uniform every day. He missed the camaraderie.
When we were in Vietnam, we had an enemy over there, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. That was our enemy. When we came home, we felt as if we were betrayed by our government and betrayed by the media and betrayed by the population, by their country. So, you know, if you want to know who I thought my enemy was when I came home, I would say, you're my enemy. People who stayed here, the civilians who stayed here. When I came home, I was subject to a lot of ridicule, verbal abuse. And I'm sure Richard was too.
I lost a lot of friends over it. I still have a hard time making friends with folks because I'm afraid something will happen to them. A lot of guys, when they came back from Nam, they was messed up. Still a lot of them are messed up for life.
And guys told me, he says, you need to go to the VA, get some help. And since then I have, because I got PTSD on certain things that happened to me. And so I can imagine what he went through being an officer, and you're responsible for your platoon, or if you're a company commander, your company, and you have to do what you think is right.
It took a long, long time, and my wife, you know, to help me through it. And she put up with a lot of stuff, you know, waking up in the middle of the night from a nightmare, you know. Excuse me.
They were left behind, literally. There, and they were left behind by their own. So whenever I talk, I always, you always should tell a Vietnam veteran, welcome home, because they were never told that.
On November 30th, 2009, Richard goes to the VA hospital and sees a psychiatrist for the first time.
I have been living on the streets for the past 21 years. I have never seen a psychiatrist before. I used to drink 2 beers and some wine per day. In March of 1975, my girlfriend died in an accident. Other women I have lived with have died, and I have increased my alcohol intake to a lot more. I feel depressed and anxious. My request is treatment for my depression and my anxiety, and also help to get off the streets.
In order to get authorized for treatment for his PTSD, Richard was asked by the VA to provide written examples of what he saw in Vietnam.
We came under fire. 1 WIA, I flanked the enemy and killed 1 VC with an M26. My fire team leader was shot in the back. He died a foot from me. I could hear his internal organs collapse and watched his body shrink a bit. Sergeant Meeks was behind me. Seconds later, the M60 gunner was hit in the head. I saw the hit. When I got to him, 1/3 of his skull was blown off, exposing his brain. 2 VC refused to surrender and were armed with at least 1 M2 carbine. An M26 was ordered dropped into the spider hole. When we dug them out, it was then discovered they were 2 VC females, about mid-20s, alive, but one had a fist-sized star-shaped hole in her forehead with a piece of brain on top of her skull. The other, blood streaming from her ears and missing part of her fingers. I was 1.5 feet away. Called medevac, then found a Ziploc bag with lipstick, rouge, and 1 ounce of perfume. This humanized the enemy, cutting my effectiveness as a leader in half.
Richard was also diagnosed with skin cancer on the top of his head, which he attributed to being sprayed by Agent Orange.
While assigned to D Company, 501st, we could see the plane spraying Agent Orange on the Laotian border. 15 to 20 minutes later, we could feel a mist on us. Also, when I was leaving Vietnam in December of '68, I was sprayed while at Camp Sally. Same scenario, 3 planes in formation near the Laotian border.
His wounds that he had incurred, because you get bombs would blow up near him and you get tossed, and you're not really the same after that. You got bruises and deeper wounds.
I found this one box in the back of his storage unit, and I opened it up, and it was like everything from a spy movie. There was a Spanish-English dictionary, maps of Venezuela, tapes to learn how to speak Arabic, 2 knives, 2 what we would call in police work, throw-down phones, and all these handwritten cryptic notes. I then made my most shocking discovery. I found his passport. And here, I'm thinking this little homeless man that I knew all these years, he was secretly traveling all over the world, to Oman, Jordan, Iraq, Cambodia, Thailand, and on 2 separate occasions, he went to Venezuela.
The biggest red flag to me is, how are you paying for this?
My first question is, where'd the money come from?
How the hell did he travel to all these places being broke? Exactly, and you have to have money coming from somewhere.
As a risk taker, Richard would find great pleasure as he derived his whole life from doing something which A, involved risk, and B, made him stand out. And so, there's a lot of places in this world you can go and get yourself into a whole bunch of trouble if you want to. And usually it involves merchandise of one kind or another.
Richard might have gone back to the dark side too. I mean, I don't know. Maybe doing some deals here and doing some deals there. I mean, I don't know.
He wasn't a traveling person, I guarantee you that. So he was doing it for a reason.
No, he called me one day, and I was surprised, and I says, "Hey, I need $800. I lost all my money, and in order to get home, I didn't even know he was over in Thailand."
He told me in the letter he was going overseas somewhere, Thailand or someplace like that. I'm not sure where it was, but he was fixing to go overseas, and he'd get with me when he got back. After that, that was the last I heard from Richard.
I was going away on vacation, and he asked me if he sent me a check for $5,000, would I keep it secure for him? And I said, yeah, sure. And he said, and then if I need any money, you could send it to me. I'm going to, words to the effect of deal with my enemies. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, there's a couple of people that need to be taken care of. And I said, okay, don't tell me anymore. I don't want to hear anymore.
He was always going after them, or people who owed him money. From what? I don't know. It's a piece of puzzle. I have no idea. You're such a great guy. How can you have all these enemies? What did you do that was so bad that you had all these enemies?
2007, Richard was requesting immediate deployment to go to Iraq and serve as a special forces advisor in Kuwait. There is a chance that he might also have been going over there to work as a private military contractor or even a mercenary. In 2009, and also later in 2012, Richard's passport and other documentation that I found reveals that he traveled to Puerto La Cruz, Venezuela. I spoke to some other federal agents who had experience in South America about what's there, and they advised me it's a port city and that right now it's very lawless. And matter of fact, even in 2009 and 2012, it would be a dangerous place. Richard would be going there for some type of business or assignment.
The stuff I did in Central America, it was training, and I did have older special ops guys because they're going over there to train. So his age is no problem. Maybe they're sending this guy over there, and I've seen it where they're sending older SF guys, older SEALs, to go over there and train the headsheads, to train the upper management, to train the police forces, not to do the field stuff, but the infrastructure.
I said, what's going on with that? He goes, oh, well, I do work for the CIA, and I do work for the ATF, and I'm a consultant and things like that. I said, oh, okay.
He is the perfect covert operative to go in there and say and do things, because nobody's going to think, they're not going to look at him and be, I come in and I'm not a big dude, but I'm in shape. I got tattoos. I can't hide in plain sight. That guy, that's the type of guy that can hide in plain sight. You know what? Going back overseas, though, is where you feel normal. And that's where I'm sure he still want to go overseas, because you go overseas and you work, the post-max stress isn't there, because you're back in an element where your adrenaline's always up here. Where in the United States, it's right in the middle. And we don't like to live like that. I'm sure he's the same way. If I met him, he'd tell me the same thing. I'm either all the way up here or I'm sleeping and I'm all the way down here. There's no middle. And I'm sure because of his passport, because of what he did, he went over there to be normal, to feel like he did when he was in Vietnam. And I get that.
One time, I have caller ID on my phone, about maybe 15 years ago. And the phone rang, and I always look at the caller ID, and it said Fargo, North Dakota. Who the hell do I know in Fargo, North Dakota? And my son was living with me at the time. He says, Mom, just answer it. He says, that's bizarre. Just answer the phone. It was Richard. What the hell are you doing? The man who hates the cold. Why are you in Fargo, North Dakota? I'm tracking down some of my enemies.
I spoke with the manager at the hotel Richard stayed in North Dakota, and she confirmed he traveled there in both 2003 and 2008. And the 2 times he stayed there, he went there both times in February, in the dead of winter. And at this time, I still haven't located any persons or reasons for his trips.
Grand Forks, that's brutal that time of the year. Now, there are Air Force bases, there are military installations all along that corridor, and there's a pretty high-profile Air Force bases out there. That's used to be the big-time Cold War. That's where, if we're going to hit Russia with nukes, that's the Dakotas. That's where the places are.
I filed Freedom of Information Act requests to both the State Department and the CIA. Neither turned up any further investigative leads, both stating that they can neither confirm nor deny any knowledge of Richard J. Flaherty. That last week in Richard's life, he was really in great spirits. I think he was happy to finally open up to somebody and tell his life story. We would meet up almost every day at either the coffee shop, the gas station, or the Subway sandwich shop, and he would tell me more pieces about his life. He also agreed to let me help him with his ongoing battle with the VA hospital. Another officer that I work with was able to get Richard a meeting with some of the top people who are advocates in Miami that help vets like Richard get all the proper treatment he needed. The night of May 7th, I went to speak to Richard under his tree. But he was already sleeping and I didn't want to disturb him. Before I left, I felt like I just needed to take a picture of him because I didn't have any. It seems in the picture like the light is pointing to exactly where he was killed, only 2 nights later.
The morning of May 9th, I was riding my bike, and I have a very specific route I take. And as I did, and I made that turn, I noticed the engine was out there and the scene tape was up, and out of curiosity, I kind of took a peek as I passed through, and I noticed it looked like Richard. And that's when it hit me, and I couldn't believe it at first.
Yeah, we all recognized him right away, and called for, the Aventura Police Department showed up, and you could tell he had been struck by a car.
When I responded on the scene, I met the officers that were already here, and one of them said, "Oh, the little guy that's always around, he got hit by a car." And when I walked up, I recognized I knew his first name. I never knew his last name.
I remember it was very early in the morning. I got the call that we had a fatality. It was a pedestrian versus a vehicle. And they told me it was, Richard. And I said, which Richard? And I said, the little Vietnam vet. And right there, I almost, I dropped my phone because, I knew him. This is the first time where I conducted an investigation where I actually knew the victim.
We started reviewing surveillance video to determine what kind of car may have struck him, and we were starting to compare the debris that we had found. We initially felt it was probably someone that was DUI or impaired from some of them.
According to the official police report, the subject, Ms. Sokolov, is an employee of the Miami-Dade Police Department and was working at that time as a stenographer for their homicide unit. Ms. Sokolov stated that although she normally works at the office till 11 p.m., that night she worked late and left at approximately 11:50 p.m. After hitting Richard, she then drives home several blocks away and exits her car. She paces up and back, looking at the damage on the exterior of the vehicle. She then states that she decided to walk back to the scene that night to try to see if she could locate what she hit. About an hour later, she returns home and calls her insurance company.
Thank you for calling Kemper Specialty Claims. This is Amber speaking. How may I help you?
Good evening, Amber. My name is Leslie Sokolov, and I was coming home from work tonight, and something hit my car, and I don't know what hit it, but there's damage to my car.
Have you notified any authorities at this point? Have you contacted police?
No, I hadn't, because there was nothing that was visible that could have hit my vehicle.
Okay.
I thought that it was a palm frond that hit my car, but I don't know, not with the damage that I have. I don't know. At the time that it happened, I didn't see another vehicle, but when I got home and I parked my car, I walked the route that I had driven, and I didn't see anything other than some other vehicles that were in a separate incident.
During the course of our investigation, we determined that Richard was walking north, probably just outside of the crosswalk. He was walking from the public side towards Walgreens across 199th Street. He was struck with the front left fender of the vehicle and causing him to, he was walking facing northbound. The car was heading eastbound, so it struck him on his left side and towards his back. When he went back from the impact, he hit his head on the edge of the windshield. As she's walking across, right about that line is where he was struck, but outside the crosswalk to the right of it.
Just out of curiosity, if she's coming from straight, wouldn't she have clear vision of whatever's in front of her if Richard was crossing the street?
Absolutely. There's no obstructions in the roadway that would have obstructed her view. There are street lights here. There's a street light right here. This is a well-lit intersection, in my opinion. It's not pitch black. It's not dark. There's street lights. There's traffic signals. There's businesses in the area with lights on at night. I feel that she should have seen them had she been cognizant of what was in front of her. Based on seeing Richard walk, he did. It's not like he darted out into traffic. He wasn't a runner. Richard didn't run into traffic. He walked at a slower than normal walking pace. So it would have taken him several seconds for him to cross the roadway from where we're standing across the road, and she should have seen him.
In your experience with these type of accidents, is it normal not to brake?
Generally, when you're in a crash or there's some sort of loud noise or impact with your car, a lot of times the person's first reaction is to jam on your brakes. And to us, there was no evidence of that because there's no skid marks or no evidence of any braking.
I mean, if you hit a bug that hits your windshield, at 35, 40 miles an hour, just a bug that big, you can hear it. A 100-pound person, it's going to be multiplied by that much amount. I mean, you're going to have extensive damage. You're going to have blood. You're going to have tissue. You're going to have hair all over the front of that car.
The damage on the car was definitely noticeable and significant, and the person driving knew they were in some sort of crash. She claimed that she just didn't know she hit a person.
When I saw him, he was kind of halfway in the bushes, halfway out. You know, it was definitely obvious.
As soon as you walked up to the bushes, you could see, I mean, the bushes are no more than, 24, 30 inches tall.
So how far, you think you would have to be able to see him? If you were 10 feet away, would you see him?
Yeah, for sure.
It's a little bit out of the ordinary with that amount of damage, not to stop, call the police, say, hey.
We found that pretty telling that she didn't notify the police, but she bothered to call her insurance company to claim the damage on her vehicle.
The next morning at about 9 a.m., she decided to again walk back to the scene to see if she could locate what she hit. Despite seeing the street blocked off by the police, despite seeing a yellow blanket used to cover Flaherty's body, and despite being told by a bystander that there was a hit and run, Ms. Sokoloff, still for her own reasons, decides not to notify the police, who are standing right there on scene. Once at the Miami-Dade Police Department, she notifies the supervisor and tells him that she believes she might have been involved in a hit and run. At approximately 1:30 p.m., a Miami-Dade police sergeant notifies the Aventura Police Department that one of his employees might have been involved in a traffic homicide.
And then I got a phone call saying that, from the detective saying that I may have your driver and I may have your vehicle. And I sprinted over to the Miami-Dade Police Department headquarters. So I met with the detective. He met me outside. I talked to him. He told me that he showed me the vehicle that may have hit Richard. He said that the driver's inside, just beside herself with remorse. So I went inside and I spoke to her, and she was almost destroyed. She couldn't keep it to herself. I basically took her statements down, asked her more questions, finished the interview, and then I gathered all my information and went back to my sergeant. We spoke about it. We talked about it. We put everything in a packet. I typed everything up. That's when we started calling and talking with the state attorney's office. They just felt that they gave her the benefit of the doubt that she just didn't know what she hit. And I was specifically told, do not arrest the driver.
We have a lot of DUI activity out there, right? And if you did hit somebody and you know you've been drinking, are you going to stop? Now, am I saying this woman was drinking? No, I don't know nothing about that. But I do know that it's a problem in South Florida. We have a major problem, and there's really nothing to be done about it. It's just happenstance if you're unfortunate enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And unfortunately, Richard was.
There was one last obligation I owed to the family, to go through his footlocker. So in his things, I found a document about a woman named Lisa Davis.
He asked me if I would send checks to this cemetery in, I think it was West Virginia. Is that where he was buried? And he said he wanted to be buried. He had spoken to the people that ran the cemetery, and he had wanted to be buried in the vicinity of this woman who he had been in love with.
Why choose to be buried in a small cemetery in West Virginia when he could have been buried in Arlington's National Cemetery? I found a letter that Richard wrote to Lisa's sister in 2008. In the last paragraph, I learned his true feelings for her.
I've been in love with Lisa for 33 years. I will be in love with her for the rest of my life, on this plane and beyond, for death will never separate my love for her.
I also found poems Richard wrote to Lisa, and I even found a will where Richard left whatever he had to her family. I spoke to Lisa's sister Melinda, and she told me her sister died of blood poisoning. This now explains what Richard was talking about in the psychiatrist's office when he mentioned that more than one woman in his life that he loved had died. Even though I've been researching Richard's entire life for the last 2 years, the enormity of the moment was very powerful. To actually see and hold his uniform, to see all his medals lined up on the desk, it brought the myth of Richard Flaherty into reality. This is the Silver Star. During his 2 combat tours in Vietnam, Richard was decorated over 13 times with the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, 2 Purple Hearts, the Gallantry Cross, Combat Infantry Badge, Army Commendation Medal, Parachute Badge, Air Medal, Vietnam Service Medal, Vietnam Campaign Medal, and the National Defense Service Medal.
We got to the mausoleum. He was already laid out. It was kind of it looked like a chapel. Small, very small. And the casket was open, and it's terrible. It was terrible. The post, they played taps on the trumpets, I guess it's the trumpets. And that was really, we couldn't help but cry. My son and I just crying and crying.
He was like bigger than life and such a little guy. And that was the comical part too. You know, this is such a little guy, but there's so much intelligence and creative ability, creative thinking, spontaneity was all there in Flaherty.
Richard was comical by his height, but he also had a sense of humor. And if you challenged him, he would challenge you back. So he was not going to back down.
I think Richard, deep down, that's probably what he wanted. A normal life, but it just wasn't in the cards for him.
I noticed they had a memorial, like a little makeshift memorial in the bushes. I tried to get a sign put up for him, you know, a small way of honoring him. And it never happened. You know, like the city gave us all this red tape. And then one day I was talking to Cap and I said, Cap, I have this sign and it's for Richard. And I told him a little bit about his story. He goes, you know what? We're going to put it up. And we did. It's still there, which is a good thing. But it was kind of our way of, you know, taking our hat off to him. And I mean, he deserves way more than that.
It's tough, and to watch a veteran of a war, a highly decorated veteran, just walking the streets and, you know, eking his way through life, it's heartbreaking.
Sad. It's a pretty sad ending.
You know, that was just very difficult for us to not be able to bring closure and justice to Richard.
You know, Richard should have had better.
He definitely was a hero. You know, and there's no other way to describe him. Yeah. I'm privileged to be his brother.
Richard J. Flaherty was finally laid to rest. Not in a hero's grave, but as a simple man in an obscure cemetery next to the woman he loved. As I think about this journey into searching into Richard's life, I really feel honored that he opened up to me, and I'm honored to have known him. But I'm saddened to think that he's not the only homeless vet that's on the streets, who's too lost to reach out and connect with anybody.
So Richard Flaherty is telling me the story of how he was the shortest guy in the military for his knowledge. Go ahead.
Well, according to the Army itself, there's no one shorter than 4'9". I think you have to be 5 foot to get in the military. So after a congressman, a 3-star general, they would take a physical. I was allowed in, and they called me on a Friday. They said, well, you got to recommend a waiver for your height, but not your weight. So they said, Monday you have to come in for another physical. We got to weigh you. They have to be 100 pounds, only 97. So I had to gain 3 pounds over the weekend. Well, I gained 6. It stayed with me till this day. I'm 103. And that began the whole escalate with the basic AIT.
And where were you stationed in Nam?
We began in Benwell. We went up north for the Tet Offensive, so it was up with I-4 close to the militarized zone. And
what was your rank?
I began at, by then I was a second lieutenant. By the time I left, I was a first lieutenant.
Right.
Then,
and what years were you there from?
In Vietnam, was there December 17th of 67 to December 17th of 1968. And went back and went to Special Forces for 3 years. And then...
Who were you with the Special Forces?
Began with the 3rd Special Forces group for training. Then I went over to the 46th Special Forces Company in Thailand. And I came back to the 10th Special Forces group in Fort Devon, Massachusetts. So I have my Green Beret.
Okay, so you were a Green Beret?
Yeah.